Hey everybody, welcome back to Monday, the best night of the week. You know what that means? It's time for this week's episode of RfRx, your prescription for coping. I'm Kara, I'll be your host. I have with me here today reminding us that everything is fine, Rob Palmer and his cat. Rob, how are you?
Say hello, Peggy Sue. We're
Oh.
fine. Happy to be here today with our special guest.
Yes, and Peggy Sue, who is one of our least credited co-hosts, but is very vocal, and
She's
we love
all
having
over
her.
the internet because pretty much every time I interview somebody like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Bill Nye, you can hear in the background, and there's nothing I could do about it.
I love it, and I love that Zoom actually tried to mute you as you were doing the meow. It really tries, but she makes it through. I love it.
How are
Well,
you doing
welcome both of
today?
you. I am doing well. I am glad to be here, glad to be present for our program. I have been particularly looking forward to this one. It's a fun topic and I can't wait. How about you?
Yeah, especially because you have some experience. You did it your own talk that intersected the subject of tonight a little bit. So we'll try to bring that up later.
That's true. That's true. Yes, I did grow up deep into the belief in all things demonic and exorcism related. So
So it's
yeah, I
really
can't
interesting
wait.
because I grew up Catholic, as people who listened to the episode where we all told our backstories would know. And what I didn't mention there because it didn't come up was I didn't believe in exorcisms. No one ever asked me. I don't know. That's a Catholic thing. We'll hear about it, but I don't know. It never stuck. I didn't believe in that crap. I didn't believe in
Yeah.
demons going into people and controlling them. I don't know. They did a very bad Catholic indoctrination of me, I have to say.
They did. Well, I feel like, Rob, I didn't know you when you were a child, but I feel like you were probably extra resistant to some of the claims,
My
these supernatural
my mom
claims.
always said, "Why are you asking so many questions?" So yeah, that's a little hint of that. I was a skeptic even back then. It's like, yeah, no.
Yes, I believe it. I am
And
not
I
surprised
also
by
don't
this.
believe that that host becomes an actual body of Jesus. So yeah, that was like
Yeah.
when I found out that that was supposed to be believed. This, what are you kidding me?
And that was young Rob's first
Yeah,
step out of the faith.
absolutely. Okay, so JD Sword is a columnist for Skeptical Inquirer magazine and a contributing writer for its sister publication, Free Inquiry. He also writes for the website AIPT Science, where he provides a skeptical analysis of pop culture references to the infernal. JD focuses on historical and contemporary cases of exorcism and demonic possession, the history and practice of superstition, magic, and witchcraft, as well as urban legends and conspiracy theories related to pseudo-Satanism and devil worship. He is the host of the podcast, The Devil in the Details, as well as a warlock in the Church of Satan. Welcome to Recovering from Religion, JD. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you very
There
much
we
for
go.
having me.
Thanks for
And we
agreeing to
are
come on to our little show here.
I have to say, I'm a
yeah.
little jealous seeing Peggy Sue because I don't know where my cat is. She's usually here in my lap too.
Oh, I'll
I bet
bet
we'll see her
she's not
later.
as loud as Peggy Sue. Actually, I've
Oh,
just
only when she wants food.
just discovered, make me a bad cat daddy. I've had her for well over 5 years. Just realized she's probably totally deaf, which
Oh,
one of the symptoms is a cat will meow very loudly because they can't hear themselves and they can't moderate it at all. So
That makes
yeah,
sense.
I think that's the reason she's so loud. She meows. Little 8 pound cat, and she sounds like louder than 16 pound cats we've had by far.
you should try to like notice if she jumps or acts startled if there's like loud noises or
Doesn't. So I have a carbon monoxide detector, which is automatic. It comes on, it does a sound, and it tells me on the phone. It did it today, and she was sleeping right near it. And I looked at her when it went off. Her ears did not twitch. That was pretty good. Another bit
I
of
think
evidence.
your hypothesis is pretty sound.
Seems to be.
Yeah.
So JD, let's learn about you before we get into the topic that we're here that you're here to talk about. So, how did you become the things you are? How'd you become a skeptic? First off,
So
did you ever believe in the paranormal, supernatural things in your lifetime?
I did. I was really interested in ghosts, demons, things like that, from a pretty early age. I'm a big fan of horror films, so anything that's kind of weird or scary was very attractive, and I probably would have become a paranormal investigator if I hadn't gone down the path of skepticism, because I was very interested in demonology in particular. If it wasn't for the whole celibacy thing, there was a time where I wanted to be a priest specifically because I thought priests conduct exorcisms. They fight demons, and that's really cool. Who doesn't want to do that?
Wait a minute. So did you ever do any training? I know I'm jumping ahead, but did you ever do any training in how to do exorcisms or anything like that?
No, because I mean, I know that Bob Larson has courses that you can graduate from, and you'll be a fully trained exorcist, but they're quite expensive. Um, and this was back in the early 2000s, so if anybody had any kind of like websites, they were probably just a smidge above like Angel Fire. But I, read every kind of book that I could on the paranormal. I was, really, really interested in the occult because I'm a big metalhead. I love Black Sabbath, Iron Maiden. So when it wasn't quite as tenable for me to be going out and kind of ghost busting, which if the time had been right and the technology had been right, I probably would have been one of those kind of wannabe Zach Baggins types. But since that didn't kind of pan out, my next foray was I was going to go to college and be a psychiatrist, but I was going to be specifically a Jungian psychiatrist because I was really fascinated with the tarot. And, tarot and alchemy, I'm still, really,
Wait, what
really.
does that have to do with Carl Jung? I didn't know there was a connection there.
So Jung, not so much the tarot, but Jung was very, very interested in alchemy. He really believed that the kind of symbolism and the language that you would find in a lot of these alchemical texts mapped onto his theories of the unconscious and the kind of archetypes. So there's a very big volume, which I don't have it down here. It's up in my attic in a box somewhere, but there's a very, very dense volume of his work just specifically talking about alchemy and how it relates to his ideas. But what I didn't realize was Jungian psychology was kind of out of fashion, and you can't just kind of go to any university and take classes and come out a Jungian psychiatrist. So through those kind of courses that I had to take for the psychology major, I got a better appreciation of the scientific method, what psychology was currently about, what the kind of focus of the field was today. And basically, I came out of college a skeptic. It's the only good thing that came out of college. I don't know if it was quite worth the $30-some thousand price tag, but here I am.
So
I mean, you might have paid that much in tithes later on in life. It might all even out. I don't know.
Maybe. And again, there's the whole celibacy thing. So,
so all right. That's for Catholics, not necessarily, Protestants. So
yeah, I had long since given up the Catholic priest exorcism bit.
So, do I presume you lost your Catholic faith also at that like?
Oh, no. I was never Catholic. But I knew that Catholicism kind of had the monopoly on exorcism.
Oh, really? So you
So,
weren't even a Catholic, and you wanted to
no,
be?
I never really particularly had a very religious upbringing. But I do seem to recall my mom telling me about the story of, Lucifer and the fall from heaven. And that really, really fascinated me. Like the idea that this being was like the most perfect and beautiful of all beings, and then somehow became like this evil, vengeful character. It had the complete opposite intention that I'm sure my mom had, And from that, then, I became really, really interested in demonology. And in my middle school, I found a copy of Russell Robbins' Encyclopedia of Witchcraft and Demonology. And I read through that book like no other. And it was funny because I don't even know how I got it, because they tended to keep it behind the counter. And somehow I always ended up getting it. Like, not even checking it out, just like picking it up and taking it to a table. But yeah, I was never Catholic, never even particularly fundamentalist Christian, but I did believe. There was even a period, like I said, when I was believing in the supernatural, where I even like tried really, really hard to make myself as Christian as I could be. I read the Left Behind books. I was convinced that demons were real. Um,
Did you believe that the rapture was about to happen?
I actually believe that George Bush was the Antichrist.
Wow,
There
now
was
that's
Wow.
interesting, because a lot of so there tends to be a lot of crossover between religion and conservatives, but it sounds like this is a crossover with religious beliefs and people who are not Republicans. In this case, how did you develop that belief?
very credulously.
Well,
I don't remember how I found it exactly, but there was a website that
Uh,
was basically an Angel Fire site with all the little spinning icons and everything, and it was just somebody blathering about Nostradamus and Mavis and 9/11. Saddam Hussein is like the little horn, and I completely ate it up. Like, it made perfect sense to me. And then, of course, you get past 8 terms as president, and
well,
the end has
8 years, 8 years.
yeah, 8 years, 2 terms, and the end has not come. Now, I will say, as someone who is adamantly not Christian, I think Donald Trump is a really good candidate. Like, way, way checks more of the boxes than Bush.
And because if he gets elected again, he might actually have 8 terms, because he's basically told us
Well,
if he could live that long.
I mean, if you think about what conceptually, what would the Antichrist mean? If you think about that as conceptually the opposite of Jesus Christ, but at the same time having this kind of hypnotic charisma that
Mm.
fools the bad Christians, if you will, into believing in him, Trump fits that to a T. There's not a
Mm.
speck of him that is, Christ-like, but his followers sure think he is. And I feel like the fact that he could get so many of those people to kind of fall for that, if I was a very religious person, I would definitely be buying up my big buckets of food that you can store, for the
Mhm.
rapture when it comes.
Survivalist. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
All right. So how did you, because you've identified yourself as a warlock in the Church of Satan. So how did that happen?
So I have been an active member of the Church of Satan since, I believe, 2018. And essentially, elevation through the church is based on merit. You have to demonstrate how you apply the philosophy in your life to maximize what you consider valuable. So in my case, I suspect it was demonstrating my ability to talk about subjects related to Satanism, distinguishing Satanism from popular misconceptions of devil worship, and being able to hopefully articulately discuss the philosophy. I'm not an official spokesperson for the Church of Satan, so anything that I say is purely my opinion. But basically, it was a recognition of, hey, you're doing pretty good. Keep it up.
Yeah, I can definitely understand them doing that because your podcast and what you write about, absolutely. So could you just describe in a minimum way what the tenets of the Church of Satan are. We actually had a talk on the Satanic Temple very recently, actually. Yeah, but I don't think we've had a representative or anyone who is in the Church of Satan to discuss how that's different.
So the Church of Satan was founded in 1966 by Anton LaVey as the world's first carnal religion. So most of the world's religions, the big monotheistic ones like Islam and Christianity, not so much Judaism, but we'll talk about those Abrahamic ones, and even Hinduism and Buddhism to some degree, they're based on self-denial, on the idea that this world might be unpleasant and you might suffer a lot, but it's going to pay off in the end. Either there's going to be a world to come that's a lot better, or you're going to accumulate good karma and you'll hopefully be reborn to a better life. But the idea of having a carnal religion is this is the only life that we get. So we're going to do the most that we can to maximize our enjoyment here. Now, the religion aspect of it is, and I think Anton LaVey had a lot of foresight to be able to come to this conclusion when he did. Religion provides a certain kind of community and drama that resonates with people. It wouldn't be as successful and enduring as it has been if it didn't. But that doesn't necessarily mean that a religion has to be based on subverting yourself to some kind of omniscient benefactor. You can very much have the same kind of ritual and drama that you would get with like a Catholic mass, but you can recognize that what you're doing is all kind of show. It's all theatrical. So one of the big misconceptions is that the Church of Satan, Satanists, worship Satan. That's not the case. It's an atheistic religion. It always has been. But the idea is that the symbol of Satan, the archetypal character of Satan that you would find exemplified in, say, Milton, is a really good symbol for the pride and the individualism that we should celebrate in the human animal, but also the kind of earthy, carnal, lusting, desirous animal that we are and that we want to celebrate, as opposed to, denying oneself that you see with the image of Christ on the cross or the really, really skinny, shriveled up Buddha sitting beneath the tree. So Satan is the symbol that encapsulates what we consider worth celebrating in man, but we're not necessarily worshiping Satan.
Okay. All right. And actually, Helen corrected me, and I had forgotten that we had a representative of the church just very recently. We did a Celebrating Yule episode. So if people are interested in more details about the Church of Satan, they can find that, and I'm sure somebody's going to put the link in the chat.
Say, who is that?
It's in there now.
Celebrating Yule with Satan and Dr. Sarah St. Abaddon was the name of the episode for those who are not looking at the chat because they're watching this from the future, so they could look at that in our YouTube channel. So,
well, it's the present for them whenever they're watching
it. It's all relative.
Rob, you're muted.
Time like the planet is a flat disk.
So lastly, about your own background. So, I met you because you became a writer for the same magazine I write for, and you're a podcaster. So how did you get into all that?
So the podcasting kind of came first. And I have to say, it probably wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for our mutual friend, Kenny Biddle. Because,
by the way, somebody had in the chat, she said, a skeptic would make a really good paranormal investigator. That defines Kenny Biddle. And Kenny did a talk here, so you can find that in our YouTube channel, Kenny Biddle. Yeah.
So I found his channel through Ben Radford. I had questions about Ghost of Gettysburg, and he said, well, why don't you talk to Kenny Biddle? So getting to know Kenny and getting familiar with his show, and it was still in the early, I think he'd only been doing it for a couple of years. So even from then till now, it's changed very, very much. But, I was really impressed that he was kind of putting himself out there and, just kind of calling it like he saw it. And I always really respected that in people like James Randi. And what really got me involved in the skeptic community was Pizzagate and QAnon when that kind of happened. Because to me, I was like, this is the satanic panic of the 80s and the 90s all over again. So I really wanted to get involved in the community to kind of stave off any kind of misinformation that might be put out there so that we didn't have things go as horribly wrong as they did back then, which, for as terrible as QAnon is, I do think that we haven't seen things kind of reach that level of mass hysteria that it did. And I looked around at some of the other podcasts and stuff that were out there, because this was going into the pandemic then, and everybody was starting a podcast. And not to speak disparagingly of anyone, but there were podcasts that I genuinely didn't like. I didn't like the presentation. I didn't like the hosts. I thought they were putting out misinformation. And some just they weren't really articulating things the way that I would have wanted if I had done one. So I was like, well, maybe I'll start one myself and kind of see where it goes from there. And through writing episodes and ideas and researching things for the podcast and talking more and more with Kenny led into the writing for Skeptical Inquirer, because it was the idea of, I'll just submit something and see what they say. And lo and behold, people seem to like it. And I'm still doing it like 4 years on.
What I love about your content is that you talk a lot about the spooky stuff, the stuff that it sounds like to you was kind of fun and interesting, and to me is now too. But for some people, it's super scary. This is the stuff that sometimes keeps people in religion, this fear of, Satan is going to get me. I'm going to go to hell. I'm going to get a demon if I listen to this music or whatever it is. And I think that's such an important topic to talk about and demystify for people and kind of take some of the scariness out of it.
I
So
almost
I
wish
love that you're doing that.
that I could have that kind of fear. Because, like, when people talk about, oh, like, I would never open a Dybbuk box, or, I think my house, like, I think this place is haunted or it's demon possessed and I'm never going to go there. Kenny and I are the kind of people we're like, absolutely, possess me. Like, I'm over here. Like, I'll tell you a funny story. So there's a Battlefield Bash in Gettysburg, I think every year, that Kenny used to go to, which is actually the first time that I met him in person. And the one time that we were there together, there was a person at a booth that had this hardcover book in this case that was locked, and it had like all these chains wrapped around it. And they had this whole story that went along with it about how, this book was found in this old abandoned house, and the people that took it started to see things and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, cool, like, I want to see it. So I asked them, I was like, hey, like, do you mind if I take a look and open it up? And they were like, oh, no, sorry. Like, we can't be held responsible for what might happen. It's got to stay, behind the glass. And I'm like, man, like, if something like that could happen, possess me, make me a believer. Like, I want to see it happen. Like, I'm not afraid. I want to see the proof.
Kenny Biddle is so not afraid that he has people sell him haunted objects. I was at his house once, and he had an entire room of freaky, scary haunted dolls in little boxes.
And I think he has since migrated those to the Buffalo office.
He has. So he said, if any of these are haunted, come out and get me. And like, surprise, nothing ever has.
The beginning of one of those horror movies, is it Annabelle or
I think that's right.
yeah, okay, interesting. I mean, I feel like dolls are pretty spooky, but maybe for other reasons besides the fact that there might be a demon. They're just they're a little spooky.
The thing
If
that
you
did
ask
that for me was the Twilight Zone episode where the mannequin,
Hmm.
not the mannequin, the
The
doll when you're a ventriloquist
yeah.
came to life. And yeah, that and also Talking Tina. Yeah. So
Hmm.
I've always had a problem with the dolls. I would not have Kenny's dolls in my house.
Yeah, it's like there's a little
When
bit of some uncanny valley or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
happening there.
when I was a kid, I think there was a trailer for a movie called Dolly Dearest, which is a really, really bad knockoff of Chucky with like a girl doll. Um, I saw the trailer for it. Like my parents had rented a movie and they had a trailer, and it absolutely scared the hell out of me. Like, I don't think there's ever been a movie or anything like that that has scared me as much, like for as long as it has. Like, I not even necessarily having nightmares, but just going to bed at night would just lay there paralyzed with fear that I don't know, some living doll was gonna, it's not like we had any dolls in the house, but somehow this doll was gonna come get me.
No, I did. I had a ventriloquist dummy, Jerry Mahoney, and I locked it in my closet every night. In fact, did I lock the door? Did I lock the door?
You gotta go check.
Oh yeah, my mom had to remove all the dolls from my bedroom. I was convinced they were going to come to life and get me. Also, I refused to play with them for various other reasons as well. But I was also afraid that the dolls, and then there was this little Moses statue with a snake that I was convinced they were going to come to life and attack me. That's what dolls do. I don't know. I don't know how kids like come pre-programmed with this
Well,
belief.
the Moses is
Probably
probably
not
only
pre-programmed.
interested in like the firstborn, so or
Yeah, I was safe.
the firstborn male. So as long, check that
I'm
box
good
off.
there.
Or you could just smear blood on like your bedroom door.
Mm.
You got to get the timing right, though. I mean, I don't
That's
know.
true.
Daylight savings time might mess that up. I don't know. Okay, so tell us more, though. Let's get into it. Let's talk about exorcisms and sort of the history of this practice. What is it that we're doing? How did this get into our beliefs and culture and start floating around in the air and scaring people so badly?
So my interest primarily is restricted to exorcism in the Christian religion and primarily Catholicism, just because that's kind of the most ubiquitous one that people think about. Protestant religions, they kind of have their own separate thing, and even today, exorcism has kind of become there's almost a wild west of amateur exorcists out there, which actually kind of mirrors the early years of Christianity. But to understand how exorcism began in Christianity, it's helpful to kind of go back to Judaism. And virtually every human religion has some kind of belief in evil spirits and how you can protect yourself from them. The interesting thing about Judaism, though, or the ancient Israelite religion, is in the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, there's really not that many references to demons, and there's even less references to demons as afflicting people. So there's one reference, it's 1 Samuel 16:14, where it talks about King Saul. It says, "Now the Spirit of the Lord departed for Saul, and an evil spirit from the Lord tormented him." So you have this idea in Judaism of demons as beings, but they're not subservient to some kind of overarching evil, because Judaism doesn't have a belief in the devil. And the ideas that you find in Judaism were very much influenced by their neighbors, like the Canaanites, the Philistines. And a lot of it seems to historically come from what's known as the Second Temple period of Jerusalem. So you have the Babylonian exile, where the Babylonians come in, they conquer the Israelites, destroy the temple gets rebuilt, and then there's a series of the Israelites get conquered again and again and again. And when they come out of that exile, back, reclaiming their homeland under Rome, historians think that's when a lot of what we consider the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, was kind of compiled. And you see their ideas about demons kind of shifting and changing. Have a lot of notes here because I don't have that perfect of a memory. But you see a lot of talk about, with, for example, King Solomon having a magical ring that could give him control over demons, and he could use the demons to rebuild the temple, or the demons could impart some kind of secret knowledge to him. There's archaeological evidence that there were these Aramaic incantation bowls where the Jewish people would write prayers, some kind of inscriptions on the bowl, and then they would bury it upside down. Then around the time of like John the Baptist going into Jesus, you had a bunch of guys, which for whatever reason were kind of concentrated in the region of Galilee. And I'm not a historian, so it could have something to do with the fact that Israel at the time was very much divided between North and South, and the culture was very, very different. I don't know, that's pure speculation. But you had people like John the Baptist and Jesus, who were these kind of Galilean miracle workers. The Hebrew term is something like Anshe Masa, which I probably horribly butchered, and I'm very sorry. You had people like Hanan Bendoza, who legend says stared down the queen of the demons, like she couldn't move. You had Jesus, of course, going through his exorcisms, and the Bible or the New Testament actually mentions 5 separate instances of Jesus performing exorcisms. So probably the most well-known is the Gerasian exorcism, where Jesus finds the guy that's possessed by legion, there's however many demons, and he drives them into the herd of pigs. But there's also a separate account of an exorcism in Capernaum, where someone possessed, the demon recognizes Jesus as the Son of God and kind of outs him, and Jesus, is like, shut the fuck up, like, don't, there's another one of the Seraphitian woman who was a Canaanite, and she comes to Jesus and she's basically begging him to exorcise this demon from her daughter. And Jesus is like, well, I don't know, I didn't really come for you people. And she's like, oh, but like, surely you can do it. Like, you're amazing. And he's like, oh, because of your faith, this thing is done. And magically, the demon departs. What's really interesting is the other 2 exorcisms, the person who's afflicted, for example, in the Gospel of Matthew, it talks about someone who is afflicted by a demon, but it specifically mentions that they're mute and they're blind. There's another example in the Gospel of Matthew that also comes up in Mark and Luke, where there's a boy who's possessed by a demon, and the kind of symptoms that it describes are very much like epilepsy. He becomes very rigid, grinds his teeth, foams at the mouth. So it definitely seems as though there's an idea, not just that kind of the misfortunes of the world that befall you are caused by demons, but the idea of demons also serves as an explanation for illnesses and possibly mental illnesses. Now, what really kind of solidifies the idea of exorcism for Christianity as a new emerging religion is the fact that Jesus allegedly told his disciples, in my name shall you cast out devils. So in the early days of the Christian church, basically anybody could perform an exorcism if they had the right faith. The very name of Jesus was considered to be powerful enough that that's all you really needed. There's records by the early church fathers like Justin Martyr, Tertullian, Origen, talking about how their brethren, even the most like humble and unlearned of them, can cast out demons without any kind of amulets or talismans or magical incantations. All they needed was the word of God.
So JD, what is the doctrine now as to why it would be much harder now? You need a trained priest with all the right methodologies.
So, I mean, there's not one particular instance that brought that change about, but as science got a better understanding of mental health and psychiatry, I think the church recognized, hey, a lot of these cases probably aren't actually demonic in nature, and we better cover our ass by, you know, not just going out and giving everybody an exorcism.
Hmm.
Plus, there was a perception too, at least in the medieval era, late Middle Ages, that once all the pagans in Europe had been converted, so there was an office of the church called the catechumenate that was basically responsible for baptizing pagans. And baptism in its own way is kind of a minor exorcism. So the idea was that you're going to get these pagans ready to accept Jesus, so they're going to forsake their evil paganly ways, and they're going to accept, God into their hearts. And once they had kind of pretty much converted everybody, the idea was, okay, we've won a major victory over the forces of evil. Now we shouldn't be seeing all this demonic possession because we've chased out the evil spirits.
I was going to say, JD, you kind of made an interesting point earlier, and some people in the chat earlier on were mentioning too about this idea of, demon and spirit possession pops up in a lot of different cultures and different kinds of contexts. And to some extent, it's been kind of theorized as a way for people who have a particular kind of illness or condition or mental health situation, as a way for them to kind of get access to care or social support or community resources if they organize their symptoms in a way that is recognizable to people as, oh, this person is possessed, let's take care of them, let's help them get what they need, things like that. It's also in some ways, maybe makes sense for people to think of their situation in that way. But yes, then to your point, when we're thinking about, well, is it actually a demon? Well, is there an actual physical thing that goes into people that is a demon that we need to be afraid of inhabiting us? Well, no, this is, maybe an idiom or a metaphor that is very culturally specific in a lot of places.
Yeah, and that's not to say that these people are kind of consciously adopting these symptoms either. It's more, I would say, a function of the understanding that they have at that cultural level. One thing that I thought was really interesting is I have this book here, and it's definitely out of print, not a very common book. The Case Against Exorcism by Reverend Juan Cortez. And basically, he in it argues that pretty much every case of exorcism that's talked about in the Bible is, not a genuine case of demonic possession. But when he's going over kind of the early history, he mentions this really interesting point of early on, there was a perception of people who were afflicted by demons. We needed to kind of bring them into the monastery or whatever. And it was functioning as sort of an insane asylum at the time. The idea was that we're going to take care of these people and we're going to try and, drive out these evil spirits, but we're going to kind of take a gentle sort of approach. And then over time, for whatever reason, you get a lot more kind of hands-on, aggressive form of exorcism, which coincides with things like the Inquisition and witch hunts and things like that.
So what is the author's opinion then on probably the most famous one in the New Testament, when Jesus does the thing you mentioned with driving the demons into the pigs? So does he think that Jesus didn't know what was going on?
I can't speak for if he speculated on what Jesus' perception was, and it's been a while since I read that book in particular. But my takeaway was his argument was that the kind of demonic possession that was presented in the New Testament was that culture's way of identifying and dealing with
Yeah, I got that,
illnesses.
but that's kind of shocking if he's also thinking that Jesus, who's God, was actually wrong about that, and then, or he just maybe, yeah, if he ignored. So by
I
the
mean,
way,
I guess you could argue that, you know, Jesus maybe knew the truth, had some kind of scientific understanding of what epilepsy was, but, you know, not being able to necessarily explain to people at that time, you know, oh, this person's just having a seizure, you know, instead has to kind of do the best for them.
he played along with them.
He also allegedly heals people by like rubbing mud in their eyes.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
blindness. That was a good one.
Well,
Somebody in
and
the chat asked you
someone's
to repeat the title and author of that book.
The Case Against Exorcisms by Juan Cortez. That's with an S. And
I-
you're gonna find this on like eBay or AbeBooks or something. It was kind of expensive, but I really, really got it because I was like, well, here's somebody who was like within the Catholic Church talking about exorcisms. You know, this is not the real thing. So I was like, I have to get this. Like, I have to read what this person has to
So,
say.
but the officials, where is the church now officially? What does
The
the Pope
church,
say?
the church's stance in recent years, at least, is, you know, evil's real, of course, and genuine cases of demonic possession have happened and do happen, but they are exceedingly rare. Now, with that being said, there is not hard evidence because, you know, a lot of it's kept hush hush, but there are priests like Father Vincent Lampert who has answered some of my questions for the articles that I write, and, you know, was very polite, very prompt, very helpful. He and Father Gabriel Amorth, the guy that they based that the Pope's exorcism on, you know, they've talked about how in, say, the past 20 years or so, there's kind of been an explosion in the number of exorcists. Like 10, 15 years ago, there might have been like 10 or 12 in the United States. Now there's like 100. And there's an official like college or university in Rome that's like sanctioned by the Pope, where select priests can learn the art, like the practice of exorcism. And there's kind of two different, I guess, explanations that have been offered on that by this one author. His name is Richard Gallagher. He's a psychiatrist who claims that he's worked a lot with different dioceses on exorcism cases. He is a psychiatrist, claims to be a scientific man, but he is admittedly Catholic, and he does admittedly believe in the literal devil and claims to have witnessed actual cases of demonic possession. And the two kind of theories that he gives, or explanations that he gives, is one, exorcism is like really popular in the media. You know, there's been The Exorcist and who knows how many other derivative films that have kind of given people an idea of, this is what an exorcism looks like. This is how a possessed person acts. And so you have people that are kind of aping those symptoms,
That makes
believing
sense.
that they need an exorcism when, you know, there's really something else, possibly mental, going on. You know, possibly they're just kind of looking for attention. And the alternative theory, of course, is that basically our culture is just so lost in sin, and we've drifted so far away from the church that evil is everywhere, and people genuinely are in danger of being possessed by demons.
Yeah, I know which way I bet on that one.
wait. So this book, I'm sorry, I may have like trailed off for a second there. So this person is simultaneously hypothesizing each of these things.
He
That
presented those two, which I don't think they're mutually exclusive. You know, I think it's a sure bet that more people knowing or having some idea of what being possessed looks like, specifically visually, you know, because there's some description in the Bible, like with the Gerasene demon.
Oh,
But
it's
I
really
think,
easy to Google that on YouTube now. I mean,
right,
we have
like,
clients who call us and go, you know, you got to convince me that these aren't real because I find these videos all over YouTube.
Oh yeah. Well, there's a perfect example too. With the advent of social media, even beyond like big budget Hollywood films like The Exorcist, there's countless videos of people allegedly undergoing exorcisms by folks like Bob Larson. I feel like there's another individual that I'm thinking of, and I can't hit on their name right now. But there's a perfect example of getting sucked into this kind of algorithm where you're just watching these videos over and over and over again. And if you're somebody who genuinely has some kind of mental illness, or I think even if you just believe strongly enough in it,
Right.
and there's some kind of need that is satisfied by you being possessed, maybe it's a need to feel special, to have some kind of attention on you, to feel somehow closer to God in a way. I can see that being very tempting.
Right. Or maybe
and
to help explain why you're having these psychological symptoms in the way you
Right.
understand, right? And we're going to talk about that. In fact, at least one of the cases we're going to talk about, that became books and movies, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a really good point too, Rob. I'm kind of not a fan of this language that I'm hearing being used by this author, calling it like, oh, people are attention seeking, when something that we tend to see a lot with people who are accused of being possessed, and I don't have numbers, with me right now, but oftentimes if you think about, even just Hollywood portrayals of people being possessed, who usually gets a demon? A lot of times it's a young girl or a woman. It's somebody who has lower social power, lower access to resources from the community, financial resources, things like that. And sometimes being possessed is a way of maybe organizing our thoughts around something someone's experiencing in a way that allows them to be perceived as having a legitimate issue that they really do need help with. And this will get people to, yes, pay attention to them, not because they're an attention seeking hoe or whatever, but because they need help and don't have access to it.
Right.
And this is one way of kind of organizing our thinking around a mysterious illness or something going on with someone that we don't understand. I'm thinking of a book in particular, since we're giving book recommendations. There's one that everyone has to read in grad school for anthropology called The Spirit Catches You and You Fall Down by Anne Fatima. And it's about an immigrant family of, I think they're Hmong family, who came to the United States, and the daughter of the family does have epilepsy, and the family is understanding it as kind of a spiritual problem. Maybe she's got a spirit or something like that. But they're in the United States and they're trying to access care in a very medicalized situation where they're going to the doctor, and the doctor is taking a very biomedical approach, and they end up having, a lot of miscommunication and kind of talking past each other and misunderstandings, because they're not using the same idioms and metaphors for describing what's going on. And yes, it is epilepsy, but also the family is understanding the phenomenon in a way that is more traditional to their culture, that would allow a person who's experiencing this to access resources and get care from the community,
Right.
rather than just be ostracized.
So let's talk about the case that we advertised that we were going to talk about, which sounds much like this, right?
Real quick, if I can.
Yep.
I did see a question here that I'd like to address. Just in your opinion, what drives the Roman Catholic propensity for strongly believing in demons and perpetuating hundreds of superstitious ideas? I mean, you can probably guess what my answer is going to be. If I could sum it up in one word, I would say fear. Anton LaVey was fond of saying that the devil's the best friend that the church has ever had because he's kept it in business all these years. I don't think, because think about it, you have the perfect kind of con in that you make up this idea of original sin that everybody has, and it's got the ultimate consequence. You're going to go to hell forever and ever, and it's going to suck. And the only solution is what we're offering you. And if that's not bad enough, bad shit's going to happen to you in this life too. You could get possessed, your family could get tormented by devils, and we've got the only solution in town.
Yeah, that's reasonable. Okay, so you ready to talk about the exorcism of Emily Rose?
I am.
Okay. So I had never heard of the film. I'm prepping for this. I read your article about it, and I actually read the Wikipedia article about Annalise Mitchell. I think that's how you say her last name. It's
I think it's I think it's
Michel. I don't know how you Michel. Yeah, very very disturbing. So you want to tell us, give us a rough overview of that case?
So she was born Anna Elizabeth Michel, 1952, West Germany. Her parents were very religious, very kind of conservative Catholic. And around 1968, when she was 16, she had the first of what we'll just go ahead and call a seizure. She was in school, and her classmates kind of noticed that she was in this kind of trance-like state, and she lost consciousness. And later that night, she had a similar episode where she woke up, couldn't move her body, couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, and she lost control of her bladder. And it was described as frightening, but it wasn't, I guess, perceived as frightening enough that she said anything. So about a year or so later, she had either a second or third seizure, depending on whether or not you think that the one she had at 16 was two separate ones. And at that time, she was taken to see a neurologist. Her EEG came back normal, but the neurologist gave a diagnosis of what at the time was called grand mal epilepsy, which in modern parlance, I believe it's referred to as tonic-clonic seizures. So the name refers to the two phases of the seizure. So in the first phase, the tonic phase, there is a loss of consciousness. The person can experience nausea, vertigo, anxiety. They can have unusual smells, phantom smells that only they can perceive. You can have a visual aura, like people that have migraines sometimes describe having that kind of halo effect. And you can have bodily and respiratory paralysis. Now, the clonic phase, which is the secondary phase, has involuntary muscle contractions, which of course can result in incontinence. So when you consider that all, it perfectly describes the symptoms that she had, even with reference to the aura and the unusual smells, because she mentioned at times when she would have these kind of spells that she would kind of see a vision of like the Virgin Mary. She would smell a very sweet kind of smell like violets while she was praying. So these continued on until 1970. She was hospitalized again after having a particularly bad seizure. And again, her EEG showed what they called irregular alpha patterns with some theta and delta waves. I don't know what that means. But there was nothing pathological. So she was given anticonvulsants at the time and an antipsychotic. But going into 1973, the medications regime that she was on didn't seem to be helping. Her parents described her as, her personality was changing very much. She was irritable, withdrawn. She complained of having this kind of lasting depression. And her friends from school noticed that she was becoming kind of overly religious. And she was no longer kind of hanging out with them, but instead drifted more towards this fundamentalist kind of group of new friends.
So is this coincidence, or is there some thought that because she was going through this, somebody suggested it might be possession, and therefore she was going towards being more religious?
So a lot of times with seizures and experiences like that, you have people who have a religious background develop what's referred to as hyper-religiosity. And Annalise Michel is like a textbook case of it. It's a religious preoccupation that's taken to an unhealthy degree. So eventually, in her case, it got to the point where she was genuflexing like 400, 500 times a day, to the point where her knees
which means what to people who aren't
like where you get down on your hands and knees and pray. Um, you know, other, I guess other kind of symptoms like that would be you could only have conversations related around religious themes, consistently, obsessively dwelling on those. When I was in college, I had a behavioral neuroscience class, and I actually wrote a whole lit review on the relationship between epilepsy and seizures and religious experiences. And it was really cool because then when I was researching this case to write my article and stuff, it was like, oh, I can dig out all this old stuff that's been collecting dust. So eventually they came to the conclusion that she was having what they called complex partial seizures of her frontal lobe. And the her condition was getting worse. She was exhibiting symptoms of like depersonalization. So she was claiming that her will wasn't her own, that somebody else was kind of in control, manipulating her. She complained to her doctor of not being able to love sufficiently. She couldn't have kind of meaningful relationship with her boyfriend. And again, that is also correlated with hyperreligiosity. People that have undergone temporal lobe epilepsy and seizures can develop hyperreligiosity, but they can also develop a reduced interest in sex and a withdrawal from kind of healthy human interactions. So around 1973 is when her case really took on the kind of classic symptoms of demonic possession. So she went on a pilgrimage to a shrine in San Damiano, Italy. And, they thought, of course, this is going to be healthy for her. And she's very religious, so she was interested in going. But once she got there, she couldn't set foot inside the shrine. And she began exhibiting aversion to holy objects. And after that, like I said, she was genuflexing 400 to 500 times a day. She would maybe have 1 or 2 hours of sleep, and the rest of the night she would spend running through the house back and forth, screaming and praying to God for mercy. She refused to eat anything except occasionally spiders or flies. She was reported as having eaten coal from the fireplace, and she would drink her own urine. So eventually it got to the point where the family decided, we think she's possessed, we need an exorcism. So they, brought in some priests to evaluate the situation. And in 1975, they wrote to the bishop at the time, Bishop Joseph Stengel, and he granted them permission to do an exorcism. At which point in time, Annalise Michel refused any further medical treatment. Now, these exorcisms, this was like a series of, I think it was like 20 some exorcisms over some period of time. And her condition continued to deteriorate to the point of when she was found dead on July 1st, 1976, she was estimated to have weighed somewhere between 68 and 72 pounds. And you can see there's photographs of her, shortly before she died, and they're very, very hard to look at. And they're in my article, of course. She had fractured teeth, bruised limbs. She broke her knees from the constant genuflexing. And the coroner determined that her death was due to advanced emaciation from starvation and dehydration. So as soon as word got out, basically the two priests in the family were charged with negligent homicide, and it became this very big kind of scandalous case. But whatever the kind of politics of Germany were at the time, they ultimately decided the family had been through enough. Well, they were ultimately found guilty, but they weren't necessarily given any kind of jail time or made to pay any kind of fine. The two priests in the case got a commuted sentence, but I do believe they ultimately had to pay a fine. And eventually, years down the line, German bishops would kind of retract the church's stance on the case and say, well, she wasn't really possessed. Oops.
Oh, they admitted it.
I think, I mean, once it kind of got out and it looked rather bad, because this was back around the time of the Second Vatican Council, when the church was really kind of undergoing a lot of the changes that would kind of modernize it. So, the old kind of prayers and mass that were said in Latin now were translated into vernacular languages like English. Excuse me. And changes were made to the Roman ritual that the exorcists followed as well, and a greater emphasis was put on making sure that you were screening these people for mental health issues. Because one of the priests, Father Alt, at the time, said he didn't consider her dangerously ill. I don't know how that could have been the case. He probably should have had his eyes checked. Maybe, Jesus should have rubbed some mud in them. But more contemptibly, the other priest, Father Rentz, said the exorcism ritual expressly states that a clergyman should not burden themselves with medical matters, which in his defense at the time, that is what the ritual said, and it was not a requirement. But you can bet your ass after the Second Vatican Council and these kind of changes, which, the Roman ritual and the book that it's a part of on exorcism and certain supplications, which has a big fancy Latin name that I'm not going to try and say. It was one of the last books to be like finished being amended. And I think it was like 1999 is when they finally published the amended version. But that was one of the changes that they made. I don't think it was directly resulted from this case, but certainly the kind of bad publicity that the church got from this case couldn't have helped.
Yeah. Well, and do you know what exactly these rituals entailed? I mean, given that the cause of death seems to have been related to, I think you mentioned starvation and battery.
So in her case, I mean, oftentimes with exorcisms, you'll find that they restrain the person because they can get physically violent, and they can engage in self-harming behaviors and potentially could be, a danger to others. So I think in this case, it's not that they were physically hurting her, but it was more so she was a danger to herself, and she just wasn't given adequate medical treatment, which granted, she did refuse it and she was an adult, but I think you could also make the case that she wasn't in her right state of mind. And I would imagine that parents or somebody that has some kind of guardianship role would be able to step in and be like, I don't know if you're going to survive for us to finally drive that demon out. So maybe we should bring in a doctor. Now, the one thing that I would like to address, because I see this point come up with this case, the fact that her EEGs always showed normal, and there was never any kind of concrete evidence that she had epilepsy, other than the fact that her symptoms really, really mapped well. So apparently, from what I was reading, I think it was one in 4 cases of temporal lobe epilepsy do not have any kind of discernible cause. So that's a quarter of all cases of temporal lobe epilepsy. Doctors don't know what causes it. And another interesting feature, there's a book, I don't think it's up here. There's a really good book on Amazon about her case. There's not many books, so this one would be easy to find. Let's see if it's over here. Oh, I have too many books. Anyway, within that book, there's a lot of interviews with her family members, her boyfriend, and there's a specific line where it mentions when she would be running low on her medication, she would change the way she was taking the pills until she could get them refilled then. And of course, once the exorcisms were started, with her refusing any further medical treatment, you have to wonder, was she still taking the pills? how long was it before she ran out? If there's reason to believe that she wasn't following the medications, then it might not be the case that the medications weren't working and doctors weren't able to identify the cause of her seizures. It was that she was below the threshold for their efficacy.
It sounds like it was a failure on a lot of levels to render aid that was effective to a person who was ill with something. And would you say that it sounded like this case resulted in the Vatican making some changes in their approach? Was that a recognition that perhaps there was a medical component to this?
I think this case probably contributed to it. I wouldn't say that it was the sole cause, but I think definitely the kind of negative attention that was given. If they were already considering a lot of people who are declared to be mentally ill claim to be possessed, or claim any kind of number of things, claim to be Napoleon, you might really want to be careful before just jumping in and concluding that you're dealing with the demonic. So I definitely think that this case had probably some influence on it, just because of how high profile it was. But I think too, the church was probably smart enough to recognize, we kind of need to get with the times.
So, we're running short on time, but I do want to hear about the movie that became, the film that was made out of this story. They changed the name to Emily Rose.
Now, I was gonna say, I have to admit, I have not seen the movie because I don't really care for possession films very much.
Okay.
I feel like The Exorcist did it. The Exorcist did it probably best. So I don't, genuinely have much of an interest in seeing films beyond that.
So the second movie we're going to talk about, I don't think we have time, maybe we can do in the hangout, was The Exorcist.
Yes.
And yeah, so I actually looked that up, and in your article, JD, you had mentioned that they were going to do a reboot, you thought, and that's why you wrote your article at the time, tracking down who the actual victim was, which, by the way, not a woman, not Linda Blair, it was a boy. So there you go. Kara was mentioning before that they like women. Well, let's present it as it was a girl. No, it wasn't. But the other thing is, yes, it didn't become a reboot. They actually did a sequel with Linda Blair in it, and I read that on Wikipedia. And there's another one in production. As Helen said, the first one is called Belief, I think it was, The Exorcist Belief, and then the other one is, I forgot what that name was already, but they listed what the one in production is named, and it could always change, but yeah.
There's actually a really crazy story about one of those sequels. I don't remember what it is, but there's basically two different, but like telling the same story versions of the movie. And I only realized that after having watched them both separately and being like, I don't remember this, but I kind of do. So I encourage everybody to look up the Exorcist sequels, and eventually you'll find whichever one has that really crazy story to it.
Okay, so the official one is called The Exorcist Believer, as Helen said. And then the one that is in production, supposedly for release maybe this year, is The Exorcist Deceiver.
All right. I guess that's clever.
We'll have to talk more about that in the hangout too, like Rob said. But JD, do you have any kind of short takeaway or a few points to leave us with about The Exorcist from your perspective?
I mean, I would definitely, if you know anyone that believes they may be possessed by a demon, try to get them help, because exorcisms are no laughing matter. People die from them all the time, particularly children, from parents that believe they're doing what's right, trying to save this person's soul, and you get a little too physical and on hands with it. And there's a lot of people out there passing themselves off as exorcists, with no real credentials, questionable kind of safety, EMS training at best. And You just kind of never know. I mean, I'm not necessarily opposed to exorcisms in principle, but I think you would have to have a controlled environment in which there were medical professionals and precautions taken, to ensure somebody was receiving adequate medical care. So definitely anybody, if you know anybody, try to get them help.
So the reason that you wouldn't be opposed necessarily is it because you believe it's a psychological help to the person who thinks they're possessed, so therefore
Yes, yeah. I'm not saying that I mean, I suppose there's a chance that somebody could be genuinely possessed, but yeah, personally, my belief is, if somebody is not necessarily mentally ill in the sense that, this is a congenital problem, it's not going to get any better, but maybe, they've got something else going on.
Right.
I think the kind of psychodrama of going through an exorcism could be beneficial. It's something like the placebo effect.
And Kara, you want to tell your story quickly about that?
Oh, about performing an exorcism?
Yeah.
Sure.
Or the placebo effect.
Yes, I did one time when I was a public servant perform a placebo exorcism for someone who was convinced that their apartment was possessed. I'm not sure if they knew if it was a ghost or a demon or something, but there was some sort of supernatural entity that they believed to be living in it, and they wouldn't go into their home, and they didn't have any place to go. And so I uh, being young and silly and probably making bad decisions, told her that I would take care of it, as an officer of the law. And I took my Bible that had been issued to me that was hanging out in my bag in my vehicle, and a water bottle and a flashlight, and went in her apartment and did the power of Christ compels you. And, hey, I'm a notary public. I can bless the water bottle, and splattered it on her stove that had been mysteriously turning on sometimes, and went and checked all the closets and cupboards and doors and everything, and made sure nobody was hiding in there. Turned the lights on and off a few times, and,
So it worked.
and that
It
was
worked.
it worked. Well, there's not a demon in there, so
and they went
you
back
tell
into
me.
the house, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure if she was fully cured of her fear, but it was the best I could do for her at the time.
And you didn't even charge anything for that, right?
I did not. That was free of charge. I will come exorcise your apartment of demons free of charge. All you have to do is ask. It will have as few demons in it as after I'm done as it did before I started.
I mean, that's a better service
Guaranteed.
than, showing up, getting out your EMF and all that kind of gear, telling somebody, yep, your house is haunted, you've got demons, bye. And then just
Yeah, that's horrible, and that
Yeah.
happens a lot by these amateur ghost hunters. Well, I guess it's a professional ghost, but yeah, by ghost hunters, I should just say. That's what they do. They just confirm your fears. It's like, that's horrible.
That really is. Just leave someone in terror, and obviously they can't do anything about it if that's the only home they have to go to. Wow. I
right,
get, is the intention there that you're going to pay them to come back and get rid of it, or
Well, no, because often
No, they're not Ghostbusters.
oh, my bad.
They're
How
just
silly of
hunters.
me.
Hunters
they-
and busters is a
they
different
don't
thing.
charge for their services. They might ask like, "Hey, if you want to donate to our channel or whatever." I think the
Oh,
idea is
boy.
more so we're getting material then that we can put on
Okay.
our channel for clout.
Oh, they're
A little-
exploiting the person.
A little bit
for
of ghost hunting
their
trivia I
use.
learned from Kenny Biddle recently, because he was a ghost hunter before he saw the light, and now he investigates from the skeptical side and has never found a real ghost. And all the things he thought were ghosts, he's now decided were not ghosts. But he believes that the whole thing of all the ghost hunters use these EMF meters, as JD mentioned, to measure ghosts, right? That came from Ghostbusters. That was not a thing until the movie came out, Ghostbusters, and they had one of those. And now everyone decided to use one of those. That's the science that proved they work. Ghostbusters.
And people think that's real.
Yes, of course.
Well, I have to wonder because Dan Aykroyd's dad, I think, was like a spiritualist or a parapsychologist, I think. So, you know, I guess maybe if you know that, you can kind of trace this lineage of, well, maybe there's a legitimacy to it.
Wow.
Yeah. Aykroyd had a lot of odd ideas. Actually, I have heard that. Yes, and I didn't know he got it from his father. That's interesting.
I think it was his father or grandfather, something like that.
So I don't think we have time to go into the Exorcist situation and movie, but I will tell people one thing we didn't get to discuss is your podcast has a bunch of amazing episodes, 28 episodes since April Fool's Day in 2020 when you started, interestingly. I wonder if that was a coincidence. And one of those episodes, people can look it up, is on The Exorcist. So if they're interested in that sort of thing, definitely go there. You have episodes, of course, on exorcism and demonic possession, what we're talking about today, the Satanic Panic, the McMartin Preschool Trial, which has to do with false memories. You have other topics on false memories. Let's see, what else did you talk about? I made a list. Zombies, that's interesting. A Demon Cat of DC. Katharine Hepburn, I don't know what that's about. The Finders, I don't know what they are. QAnon and creationism, amazing. And also, your latest one is Should Fortune Telling Be Illegal? And we'll have to discuss that because I think I disagree with your consensus.
Ooh, all right. Spicy content for the hangout. Stick around. And JD, I just dropped the links to your channel and your articles and columns into the chat. Is there any place else you'd like to mention people can find you, or any final thoughts you'd like to leave us with before we take a few questions?
You guys can, I mean, people can find me on Facebook, Instagram. The Devil in the Details has its own Facebook page. On Instagram, my handle's The Satanic Skeptic. You can check out, you know, the podcast, all the links. Of course, if you don't have the attention span for podcasts, you can read the articles on Skeptical Inquirer. If you are interested in more specifically satanic content, I would humbly suggest you could check out satansplain.com or Satansplain on YouTube by Magister Bill M.
Is that spelled like mansplain? It's Satan's plane? Is that what
it's a snarky play on
mansplaining?
Where you can check out the Demented One on YouTube for satanic content. And if you want more skeptic content, you can check out our friend Kenny Biddle on his Facebook show. He's gonna kill me.
Friday. He's on Friday.
Okay.
The Skeptic Help Bar, 8 p.m.
For so many years, I think it was on like Thursday, and then he just up and changed it, and I've just never been the same. It's like daylight savings.
All right. Well, that is a lot of content to check out. What do you say we answer a couple of questions before we wrap up?
Okay. Did you collect them? Because every time I went to look for one, it was already on there. So you got them all, right?
I mean, I think you beat me to the punch on one of them.
I don't think so.
I collected as many as I could. Maybe I collected that one and forgot. But yes, we do have a few. So let's see here. I'll do the first one. Someone is asking, do all theistic religions claim that evil is a thing or force that can be located in space and influence matter and beings made of matter?
I mean, just from the surface level familiarity that I have with Judaism, I would say no, because I don't think there's any kind of conception of evil as a force in Judaism. The closest that you get, at least in like the Old Testament or the Tanakh, is the idea of an angel of the Lord that kind of carries out the unpleasant things that God wills, you know.
Was that like killing all the firstborn in Egypt?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a specific kind of name for that angel. But from what and I'm not Jewish, obviously, so take what I say with a grain of salt, but my perception is that basically evil is kind of just a natural consequence of actions, and you kind of reap what you sow in a way. You're not gonna get punished for it for all eternity, because the Jewish religion doesn't have a concept of like hell, but to some extent Yahweh might punish you, or your peers might punish you if you go around acting like a dick.
Yeah, Yahweh was pretty bad to some people, like Job. He just killed all his kids just as a test.
And he was
Yeah, but that was
the good
Satan's
guy.
idea.
He was the guy that did everything right.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's a good answer. You know, religious beliefs are very culture bound. They're gonna reflect and drive values and morals and beliefs and
Speaking of values, from
history.
the other definition of that, we had a question, very pragmatic. How much does an exorcism cost? So I suppose they made a Catholic one.
That I don't know. I would assume that they don't charge for it. I don't know if they there's an implicit assumption that you're going to put a little bit more in the collection plate. I don't even know. I imagine Bob Larson probably charges for them, but
So who's this Bob Larson? You've mentioned him, but
That's the guy
he,
that did the Far Side
yeah,
comics?
that's what I thought.
no,
Not the same guy, right?
He's a really corny. I guess back in the day you would have said he was like a televangelist. But he's this really, really corny nut that talks about fire and brimstone, and he does alleged exorcisms on his show. He has his own like trademarked cross design,
Oh,
but he does it. There's like vignettes of really, really funny exorcisms that he does. Like these people go all out, like flailing arms, and it's hilarious.
Somebody corrected us. That's right. Gary Larson did the Far Side. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad to know it's not the
Thank you,
same
Ben. Thank
person
you very
because
much.
I love the Far Side Gallery.
So now I'm interested in what you said about the special cross. Is it because it works better on demons? Is that the point of the
I mean,
special?
he would probably say that. It looks kind of just like a tacky cross to me.
So,
Um,
so
if
that's
you,
what was running through my mind when we were talking about the case we discussed in detail, where the woman Michelle like got couldn't go near the holy water or whatever, or the. Did anyone try to do a test like here's some plain water and here's some holy water? I'm not going to tell you which is which.
so
The demon would know,
so
but
the
you wouldn't
priest
know.
alleged that they did, but
Oh, interesting. They
again,
actually said they did.
again, the problem is with not having the right controls
Yeah,
in
yeah.
place.
Yeah.
No one, you can't say for sure. Well, how did she? Is there any way that she could have known? Is there
Right.
any way that she could have switched the bottles?
That's interesting that they thought of that, though, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not entirely sure what other kind of you know, tricks that they might use. I mean, one of the things that they try to demonstrate is, does the person exhibit glossolalia? That is,
Mhm.
can they speak in languages that they're not supposed to know?
Mhm.
In her case, she alleged that she was possessed by the spirits of, or demons that identified as Nero, Hitler, and Judas Iscariot. But Judas didn't speak Aramaic. She probably would have known some rudimentary Latin from being Catholic and going to mass. And of
When she
course,
had the German, because she was German.
exactly. And Hitler, of course, spoke German. And there was one part where they said something to her, I think, in like Chinese, and she had no idea what they said. But of course, she told them, if you're going to speak to me in German. But I understood what you said.
Hmm.
So, like, to me, it's like that's not proof of anything at all. I certainly wouldn't believe this person was possessed by those three spirits. And you failed, you didn't convince me that you were speaking in other languages.
Hmm.
All right. Well, on that note, I also remain unconvinced of the veracity of some of these possession claims, and I say we wrap up and move into our hangout. What say you two?
Sounds good.
Sounds good to me.
All right. Well, thank you, JD. I appreciate all of your comments and everything that you discussed with us this evening. Can't wait to talk more about it with you in the Hangout. And thanks also to all of our volunteers, Rob for co-hosting, Glenda for troll stomping, Helen and Jason for helping out with all of the above, Nikki streaming, Gail being here to help lend an air of credibility and professionalism to our show, and joining us after running a half marathon, which is amazing. Thank you to everyone else for being here with us this evening. And don't forget to join us next week. We will be back again, same time, same channel. Next week, we're talking about mysticism with John Gleason, the Godless Engineer. The week after that, we're going to have David Teachout talking with us more about mental health care and therapy and the Secular Therapy Project. And the following week on April 1st, we're going to have Dr. Ben again with a follow-up talk after the separation of church and hospital talk that was so popular. We're going to have part 2 of that. So stick around and join us for more. And if you want more RfRx in your life between now and then, don't forget to check out previous episodes on our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts for the audio only version. And don't forget to follow us on all of the social medias. We have a Facebook page as well as a Facebook support group page. We have a page on X. We have Instagram. We have TikTok. Obviously, we're on YouTube. So follow us, subscribe, like, share, do all the things. It helps us get out there and get seen by other people who might benefit from our services. And speaking of benefiting from our services, Rob, do you want to tell us a little bit about volunteering here?
Yes, as a long-time volunteer, I can say that we've learned that healing, which is one of our tenets, can also come from helping other people. Volunteers here find meaning and purpose by volunteering here. All of the services that we've talked about today are supported by a staff of volunteers. We don't get paid the atheist money, or we do get paid the atheist money, which is zero. We are always in need of more volunteers. You can go and find the volunteer form on our main site by clicking the tab at top, which says volunteer, or go to recoveringfromreligion.org/volunteer directly. There's all sorts of jobs. Most people know about our helplines, and that's what we're perhaps more famous for. They mention them on Atheist Experience and sister shows and that sort of thing. But we have so many other things we need to do here. Hey, we run these meetings. Somebody has to take these and change them into audio and edit them for upload. We have teams that find, vet, and post good resources for our clients to use and for the agents to use when they're talking to people on the phones or chatting. We have people who support the support groups. They have to host those, right? People have to support. We told you about the online community in Slack. Every one of those channels has volunteers in it, moderating them. And we're always trying to improve our IT, both for a better working system for the people who are using it, our clients, and also for we agents. So all of that we need people for. So if you're got time and you're willing, please fill out the volunteer form. And a special note, we are still looking for web developers, people who have IT web experience, highly needed right now. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, let me hand it over for our final closing RFR moment with the fabulous Glenda Jordan, Senior Troll Stomper. Take it away.
Hi, thank you so much, Kara. I really appreciate that. JD, this was a fantastic talk. I think a lot of people are just so curious about the subject. It has such a chokehold in our cultural zeitgeist of this mythology and this, you don't have to be religious at all to have an interest in exorcisms, right? It's such a foundational cornerstone of, scary movie culture and spookiness. But the reality is that it is foundationally an issue that is ableist and sexist and has caused so much harm and death to so many people and so much suffering. And it is something that needs to be talked about because despite, as we've discussed tonight, it's something that still goes on to this day. People are being subjected to this horrific and barbarous procedure, as it were, especially in nations or areas that have way higher superstition or cults that are more cut off from others. So that's I'm really glad you came here to speak to us tonight. And I have to say, you said something that I related to so much, which was I was seeking possession. I was seeking a demonic encounter so that I knew it was true. And I was raised Southern Baptist, and I had the same experience of, I desperately wanted to experience like demons or ghosts or something very intense and scary like that, because to me it would have proved that it was all real. And I was, of course, suffering from a crisis of, I don't see any really evidence out with my eyes. Like, I'm not seeing, where are the ghosts and demons and angels? And so it would have proved to me that it was all real. So I was down for it, and I'm still down. I should totally, like, yeah, send me all the haunted artifacts. I'll do, or send me some sort of witchy spell that I can do that'll invite this chaos in my life, because, and then we'll see, does it actually happen, does it not? Anyway, but thank you. I really wanted to appreciate, to give our appreciation. Thank you so much for coming out tonight.